Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Science Terminology. Today we're going to be talking about phase changes, which is a scientific term from chemistry, and we're going to learn a little bit about what that means and all the different examples of what a phase change might be, so you're a little bit more informed. Let's get started. So first of all, let's learn about what a phase is exactly. Phases are basically a state of matter, so some way that atoms arrange themselves when they're together. There are three main phases of matter and one special case that we'll talk about as well. Phases of matter are defined based on how closely or loosely packed atoms are. So basically it's a measure, or it's a way of defining how closely atoms interact with each other. Temperature and pressure determine the phase of all matter. So these are the two major things that are going to determine what phase of matter you're in. The first phase of matter we're going to talk about is a solid. Solids are the most closely packed form of matter, and they generally have lower temperatures and higher pressures. Solids have the least amount of kinetic energy. So as you can see in this picture here, even things that are solid, like the computer or screen you may be watching this on, or maybe the chair you're sitting on, which is solid, has movement and energy in it. All the atoms in that chair, in that screen, in whatever, are vibrating, but they don't vibrate too much. They stay pretty close together. Their movement is constricted. That is what makes it a solid. Liquids are the next state of matter, and they are less densely packed. Liquids generally have a higher temperature and less pressure than solids do, and liquids can take the shape of the container they're in. So if you pour a liquid into a container, it's not going to just stay in one position. It's going to take the form of the container you put it in. Liquids have more kinetic energy, which means the atoms are going to be moving a lot more freely, and that's why liquids act the way they do, because the atoms are able to move more freely than they are in solid form. Finally, there are gases. Gases have a high kinetic energy, and they generally have higher temperatures than liquids and have less pressure. Gases also take the shape of their container. So a gas, the atoms are more freeform, they're able to move around, and they're a lot less connected. That's why they can take up much more space, because they are moving around, they're not condensed and packed tightly into an object, right? They're allowed to freely move about. The final state of matter is plasma, and it's where a substance becomes so electrically conductive that electric and magnetic fields dominate its behavior instead of intramolecular bonds. Basically, you've broken the general rules of atom interaction, and it has new rules that govern it. Plasma is incredibly hard to create, and it requires a high amount of both heat and pressure. So it's really difficult to create plasma. Nowadays, it's a little bit easier. But it's not something you could do in like a high school chemistry lab. That would require an insane amount of heat. So how do phases change? Well, atoms and molecules can change phases when there are changes in temperature and pressure. So the higher the temperature is and the lower the pressure can give atoms more kinetic energy. And when atoms and molecules have more kinetic energy, their atoms are able to spread out from each other. So as you can see in this diagram over here, right? The solid has less temperature and less pressure, or more pressure, and so all these atoms are tightly packed together, and they have less kinetic energy than the liquids and the gases, which are able to spread out. This is what is happening on a molecular scale, right? When a phase shifts, basically the atoms are becoming either gaining energy or losing energy, and if they're going this way, you're gaining energy. If you go this way, you're losing it. There are special names for all the different phase changes, so we're going to talk about all those real quick, just so you have that vocabulary. Melting is when something goes from a solid to a liquid. Freezing is when something goes from liquid to solid. Vaporization is when something goes from liquid to gas. Condensation is when gas goes to liquid. Sublimation is when you go from solid all the way to gas, and deposition is when you go from gas all the way to solid. Those are some important vocabulary terms that you may need to know if you're taking like a chemistry course or something, but otherwise they're just good to know in general. Something you can also do when we're talking about phase changes is what's called a phase diagram. Phase diagrams are graphs that show how an individual atom or molecule changes phases over temperature and pressure ranges. So a phase diagram can differ for every substance, right? Because each substance is different, and the graphed lines show where the phases are changing. There's also on these graphs an intersection point between liquid, solid, and gas, which is called the triple point. At that exact temperature and pressure, the substance can be in all three phases at once, which is kind of crazy to think about. So here's an example of what a phase diagram would look like, and this is the one for water. At point A, which is right here, that is the triple point, and that's where all three states of matter exist at the same time. At point B is the freezing point. All right, that's where water freezes at normal atmospheric conditions. So at the pressure of 1 atmosphere, it freezes at 0 degrees Celsius. Point C is the boiling point. So at 1 atmosphere, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Point D is the critical pressure, where water will become plasma. So all the way up here, 217 times the pressure of the atmosphere. And then point E is the critical point, or the temperature, where water will become plasma, 373.99 degrees, very high. So each different element and molecule have these graphs, which lets you see kind of how the molecule or atom is affected by temperature and pressure and which phase they will be in based on what you have going on. Over in this section here is where the molecule or atom is a solid. So right here, the solid section. This big section here is when it is a liquid, and then anything underneath this here is a gas. Thank you guys so much for watching about phase changes, and I hope you learned something. If you want to learn something specific that I haven't covered yet, go ahead and comment below, and I will try to address your interests so you can learn what you want to learn. Otherwise, thank you again for watching. Subscribe to learn more, and we'll see you next time for some more science terminology.